Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Janine. For those of you that have tuned in before, you are probably very familiar with me. If not, I am the events programming manager here at Meetup. And I'm so excited for today's event. I've known Dan for a few years. And we are joined by none other than the Qwoted CEO, Dan Simon. He's going to reveal some tips and strategies for securing free press and media coverage. In today's presentation, you'll discover how to craft your own story, identify key influencers, tips for outreach, and how to amplify media coverage once you've secured it. Before Dan takes off, before Dan gets started, I'm going to go over the guidelines. Takes off. No, don't take off, Dan. I'm going to go over the guidelines. So your video is turned off. Only Dan and I will appear on camera. Yes, this event is recorded. And if by any chance you'd like to watch it again, you can access a recording of this event on our blog, meetup.com/blog. Also, you are muted. You can only hear Dan and myself and the music. If you have any questions, which we encourage you to please ask questions, please do submit them in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. Also, thanks to Zoom with this cool new feature, we have closed captioning. If you hover over the button at the bottom right of your screen, you can set the preference. If you want to turn it on, if you want to turn it off, it's all the button at the bottom right of your screen. And before we go, I'm going to go over the agenda. So I just did my opening remarks. I'm going to introduce Dan in about a second or so. Then he is going to take over, and we will come back 15 minutes till the hour at 3:45, and I will ask Dan some of the questions that y'all shared in the Q&A. So again, if you have any questions, we encourage you to please ask them. Please submit them in the Q&A feature. The Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Alrighty, so done with the slides, and now it's just me and Dan. So I have the great pleasure to introduce Dan to everyone. Dan Simon is a writer, author, coach, public relations veteran with 20 years working for some of the world's largest brands like LinkedIn, Morgan Stanley, Oracle, and Bloomberg, to name a few. Dan spent 6 years writing for Forbes, interviewing small business owners and understanding what made them successful. In 2019, Dan co-founded Qwoted to help small businesses and individuals secure PR for free. He is also the author of The Money Hackers, How a Group of Misfits Took on Wall Street and Changed Finance Forever. And can I just say something that wasn't added on here, Dan, is that you're also quite dapper and just like a really fine dresser. And I mean, we all saw that, right? And like the headshot that we had at the beginning, that very nice suit.
Yeah, that was the old me. That was the pre-COVID Dan.
I don't know. You know what? I cannot see it. I think like once we go back, right, as we keep on easing into normal again, I feel like it's gonna come back. It's just you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I haven't worn pants for a year and a half. So it's going to be a transition back into a suit. Yes, I do like it.
That's you and everybody else. All right, I'm going to get off the screen and I'm going to let you take it away.
You see my screen? Can you see my presentation?
Yes, I can see your face. Yep. See, there's the suit. There is the suit.
There's that guy. There's that guy and this guy. Dress for the job you want. So, okay. So listen. Thanks, everybody. And thank you, Janine. Yes, you and I have known each other for a really long time. I'm a big fan of Meetup and a big fan of the whole team there. They're just amazing people doing great work. And you gave a great overview of me, and I'm not going to repeat it, except to say, you know, I've spent 20 years in PR, which is basically being in the middle between brands that want to raise their profile and venues that they want to be in, whether that's an event or a speaking opportunity or a magazine or a TV show or a podcast. That's what PR is, and that's what I've spent 20 plus years doing. I've built a couple of quite successful agencies doing that. And working as a writer for Forbes, I got to interview lots of small businesses and help them understand or listen to them as they told me how they told their stories, which was really enlightening. And being a writer myself, I got pitched, so I know a thing or two about that. And then a couple of years ago, yes, we built Qwoted. especially as a platform to connect reporters and writers and players in the media, influencers, with experts and hopefully people like you guys that they want to get in touch with and they want to talk to for their stories. And so, yes, the last thing is my book, which came out last year, which has nothing to do with media, published by HarperCollins. It's about fintech. If you're interested in fintech separately, it's called The Money Hackers, and you can buy it on Amazon. But let's dig into it. What Meetup has asked me to talk about is really how can you, and I'm assuming that the people who are joining this call, are probably not PR professionals. You're probably people who are, maybe you're an entrepreneur, maybe you're a small business owner, you're certainly a Meetup event organizer, and you're probably thinking, I would like to raise my profile. I'd like to get some of that media coverage. I'd like to be featured. Maybe I've got a point of view or a perspective or news or a story that's worth sharing. At least that's what I'm coming at this from. I'm not talking to people who've done this for a living for a really long time. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about very briefly how the media landscape has changed. And as I said, and I will continue to say, we're using media here at Qwoted. We think of media in the broadest term. Anyone with eyeballs to share, anyone with eyeballs to allocate, attention to allocate. That could be an event organizer, a booker, a producer from a TV show, a podcaster, a newsletter writer, a traditional writer or editor for the New York Times, or CNN or something like that. So we'll talk about how the media has changed. Where could you show up? Thinking about audience and thinking about what kind of venues do you want to be in? We'll talk about how best to research, how to create a good story and a compelling story, how to identify the right influencers and reach out to them. What do you actually say when you want to start building relationships with the media? And then what do you do when hopefully that work turns into positive exposure for yourself? So I'll try and make this as quick as possible so we can get to the Q&A section. But let me just start by saying the media has changed and is changing rapidly. And I think most of that is in your favor. And when I say your favor, I mean, if you're a small business owner, if you're someone who hasn't been working as a professional in PR, or someone who has access to a huge PR agency and lots of resources. When I started in the industry 20 years ago, you were largely locked out of that. If you're a small business owner, tough. If you didn't look a certain way, didn't sound a certain way, didn't have 100 years of experience, tough. There is a huge amount of change, and I'll talk about what that is going on inside the media, and I think it's mostly to your benefit. So what's happening inside the media? Well, the first thing that's happening is an explosion and fragmentation of the media, brought around mostly by our friends at Facebook and Google and Apple and Amazon. Traditional publications like the New York Times moving large chunks of their staff to freelancers. Lots of new venues are cropping up. Some of these reporters are saying, hey, I could go out and build my own podcast, I'll build my own following. And that's where you see platforms like Medium and Substack kind of growing. Maybe I'll have a podcast. Maybe the writer is the brand. Maybe I don't need to write for CNN or CNBC. Maybe I can go, if I'm not being pushed freelance by the publication, maybe I can go strike out on my own. People are creating media venues every day. There's 1 million more media venues than there were when I started in the industry 20 years ago. Same thing is happening with events. If you think about what Meetup is doing, essentially democratizing events. It doesn't have to be CES is the only technology conference in the world. There's now lots and lots of them at all different levels, right down into the city, at the state level, nationally, internationally, online. Video casts, YouTube, podcasts, you name it. This media landscape is exploding. What does that mean? Well, firstly, it means that none of those people have any resources to help them whatsoever. Part of the reason we created Qwoted is because if you think about it, when there were only 5 newspapers in the world or whatever, New York Times and Miami Herald and Chicago Tribune, they have big newsrooms with lots and lots of resources. Today, even those venues don't have a lot of resources. And I know because I ran a podcast for 2 seasons, quite a successful podcast for 2 seasons, it's very hard. No one gives you any help when you're striking out on your own. So increasingly, the writer that might be a staff reporter at the New York Times and the freelancer who's created their own podcast are equally stressed for time and resources. They have to produce more content, and they have to do it more quickly, and they have to do it with less help than they've ever had before. That's good. They're looking for help. You can help. And then the other thing that's happening is a pressure to diversify. So it's not that you can't get media coverage if you are an old white man like me, but whether explicitly or implicitly, newsrooms and media venues are looking to diversify their sources, and not before time, we might say. So you look at an organization like Bloomberg News has an initiative, a program called Bloomberg Voices that mandates that if you go on Bloomberg TV, a minimum of 30% of their guests on their TV shows and radio shows and in their magazines have to be women or people of color. So there is this pressure to diversify, either explicitly from the top down, or just because younger reporters coming into the workforce and they're saying, I don't just want to know what this, tech bro thinks about Bitcoin. I'd like to know what a young woman of color thinks about Bitcoin. So I think those forces, right? Fragmentation of media, new media is popping up all over the place, new events, new podcasts, new videos. None of those people having resources, and all of those people trying to diversify their sources. Well, my goodness, that's fabulous opportunity for everyone that's listening on this call. So let's think about where you might show up. Where would you like to raise your profile? Everyone says, I want to raise my profile. Where do you want to go? What does this fragmentation mean? It means you could be in national magazines and newspapers. It could be events. It could be video casts. It could be podcasts. It could even be other people's LinkedIn posts or a LinkedIn live event or a Meetup event. That's all you're trying to do is earn audience, essentially. That's why we call this earned media. Inside the PR industry, we refer to it as earned media, because you are earning your right to an audience. That audience could be 10 people at a local Meetup event. It could be 1 million people on CNN or MSNBC or CNBC or in the New York Times. So I think it's super important that you start from the perspective of saying, okay, I want to raise my profile. What does that mean? Where do you want to be? What looks good to you? What do you think would be helpful to you? And of course, the answer to that in part is, well, what is your audience? What is your goal? Who are you trying to raise your profile with? And what are they reading? And I think, people say, well, what's the first thing that you need to do in PR? And the first thing you need to do in PR is read. The first thing you need to do in PR is think and listen. I think that it's probably not what everyone was expecting me to say, because to a certain extent, I think, PR, you hear the word PR and you think showy, you think splashy, you think pushing yourself out there. I also think we have a culture right now with Twitter, and where really everyone is encouraged to kind of speak first and think second. But good PR people, good people who deliver great media for themselves and for their clients or customers, begin by reading. They begin by thinking deeply about the audiences that they're trying to get to, and then the venues that those audiences give their attention to. So if you're a tech entrepreneur, maybe you're thinking about tech audiences, what LinkedIn groups, what events, what Meetup events, what tech reporters. Start paying attention as you read to the bylines on the articles, right? That's something that we don't tend to do. We read a piece in the New Yorker or the Times or on CNN, but we don't think about who the reporter, who the writer is that's putting that together. Start building a map in your mind of who those people are. Whose work do you like? What podcasts do you like? What tech trades do you like? What tech blogs might you like? You're building what we would call a media list. Essentially, in our profession, we call that a media list. But really, it's just a fancy way of saying, I've thought very deeply about the audience I'm trying to reach, and I'm learning about where they give their attention. And I'm reading what the key influencers in this space write and talk about. What's going on in their mind. It's an act of applied empathy. And I think, if you go off half-cocked and you're like, I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread, and I'm not going to read, but I am just going to go and speak, you will fail, very quickly when it comes time to sort of trying to drive free media for yourself. Now, of course, some people, might be avid media consumers. I'm sure there's some of you, maybe you over-index because you're on a panel like this one or a venue like this and you're part of Meetup. So maybe I'm talking to a bunch of people who, are just voracious consumers of media. You've got your tech podcast, you've got your tech events, you've got your tech trades, you've got your national, and you know who Nick Bilton is at Vanity Fair and previously the New York Times and what he writes about. And that's great. You've already got a great leg up. But you don't have to be. I'm actually quite a narrow media consumer. I'm sort of not naturally built to consume that much. So for me, this would be something that I'd actually have to go and, actually proactively do. This is really important, I think, before you go off and start, just trying to push your stuff down people's throats. Spend some time to listen to what they have to say. Consume what it is that they have to say. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we listen twice as hard as we speak, as they say. And by the way, this is where I would say it's first shameless plug for Qwoted. One of its use cases is it's a free media tool, free research tool. So you can go on Qwoted and you can search our database of requests by reporters, where if you think of it sort of like a Quora for reporters and writers and bookers, producers and podcasters, and you can take a topic. Maybe you're into yoga or self-help or healthy eating. Or toys for Christmas. Type it in here. You can see kind of what reporters are asking questions. You can see the questions that they're asking around it, and then you can go and actually research what they write about inside the platform, and it's free. So this is a great place to sort of begin your journey thinking about doing this kind of research, this media list building. By the way, while I'm plugging Qwoted, I should say we're sharing in the link. There is a pre-approval code that we will share with everybody in the link, I think more than once, where you can get pre-approved to join. It is a free network, but there is an approval process just by virtue of our partnership with Meetup. If you use that approval code, you can get in and skip the approval process. So yes, all this slide is doing is showing you, look, we search technology, and then here are all some questions that are getting asked around technology. And here are the names of the reporters that are writing about it. And here's the kinds of topics that they're asking about. You can go and research from there, right? But we still haven't got to the piece where I'm telling you to go out and push yourself forward, because there's one more thing that you have to do. And I call this section, you can't be a thought leader without thoughts. Right? Everybody wants to go and talk, but they don't really spend enough time thinking about what it is that they want to say. And for God's sake, if you're going to go out and start pushing yourself out there in the earned media space, you have to earn it. You have to earn it with your thoughts and your insights. So I'm breaking this down into 2 sections. One's commentary, the other is news. Why? Because when people come and talk to me as a PR guy about how do I raise my profile? They usually mean one of these 2 things. They usually mean, I see all these stories about cloud computing, and I've been in that industry for a really long time. And I've worked at some really impressive places, and I run the cloud computing Meetup event, and it's really well attended. And I feel like I have a point of view that I could share on cloud computing. And so I want to, and whenever and it bugs me that I open up the New York Times or TechCrunch or Mashable or something, and then, they're quoting all of these people, but they don't quote me. That's commentary. That's what we would call color commentary in the story. I want to be a source for those stories. So, in that regard, ask yourself, what insights or expertise do you have to share? Maybe there's research and data that you can go and conduct, right? There are great tools today to stand up, beautiful data-rich sites, things like Shorthand, which is a website that helps you create sort of beautiful, storytelling. There's There's obviously things like SurveyMonkey, where you can get, where it's never been easier to sort of stand up, create surveys, data. You don't have to have a lot of resources to go and do this. For me, certainly, if I were going out as myself around a particular topic, I'd feel better if I had a recent survey that I'd conducted, right? So do I have something of value that I can bring other than just my point of view is better than that person's point of view? Is there something new that I'm saying? In media, they say, man bites dog. That's because the dog bites man is a sort of standard newspaper headline. Everyone expects the dog to bite the man. But the man bites the dog, that's peripetia. That's something reverse. That's something very new. A couple of weeks back, there was a big story breaking around the energy consumption needs of Bitcoin. Sort of bursting the Bitcoin bubble a little bit, saying like, how is this going to work with environmentalism? Someone thought that up. That's a kind of a man bites dog kind of an angle. What's the angle that you might have? Go to a reporter with something. Everyone says this, but no one's thinking about that. That could be interesting. Think and ask yourself, why should they talk to you instead of someone else? Why should I want to quote you instead of someone? What is it about you? And then this last point I'll make about diversity and inclusion. It's not that you can't get quoted as an old white dude like me, but I will say that, obviously it is a great time. It is good to be more diverse as a source. It's certainly overdue, and it is good that you can kind of lean into that a little bit. On the news front, that's where people come to me and they go, my little technology company just closed a $2 million, $3 million seed round. Why won't everybody write about it? News has to be new information, so it has to be fresh, and it also has to be something that's relevant to the audience. It may be very important to you. It may be the most important thing going on in your life. But it may not be necessarily, at least on the surface or on the face of things, newsworthy to someone else. So, partly context is super important, right? I'll give you an example right now. Qwoted is just finalizing our own seed raise. If I go to the media and I say, hey, Qwoted, you may or may not have heard of, is raising a seed round. Do you want to write about it? They're probably not going to. What I would do is, I think what I would do is put the context around it. Qwoted is one of 3 or 4 relatively new companies that are tackling, that are bringing network technology to the last intermediary business standing, which is PR. PR is the last intermediary business. Travel, transport, dating, recruitment, they're all networks now. There's no middlemen, there's no intermediaries. PR is the last of the intermediary businesses, but a few companies, of which Qwoted is one, have stood up to challenge the entrenched system and the giants that control that business. What I had to do there is give you the names of my competitors, actually sort of put myself in context, but it makes it a much more interesting story. And that's the why that you should write about it. It's not because of me and all the trouble I've had and the sleepless nights I've had to get my seed round closed. It's because of the context where we sit in a very fast and evolving market. And then think about the relevance of the outlet, right? Who's going to cover my seed round for is it going to be New York Times? No, but there's a whole bunch of PR trades like PR Week, PR News, Bulldog, O'Dwyer's. These are venues that write exclusively around the PR industry. They should find that very interesting because contextually it's right for that level. Maybe it's local news. Maybe there's something that isn't going to be, CNN worthy, but maybe you've got a local angle on it. Actually, this thing happens in reverse quite a lot, where we have national news on behalf of our clients, and we have to regionalize it because we'd love it to be featured in the San Francisco Chronicle, but they want a local angle on it. What does it mean for the people of San Francisco? So these are the things to think about before you start going out there. But let's just assume now you've identified who your audience is. You've thought about the venues that they consume and where they show and where they give their attention. You've decided you understand what it is, the story that you want to go out and tell the world. what do you do now? The next thing is find the influencers, find those writers, those editors, those bloggers, those podcasters. The good news for you in that regard is it's relatively easy. Data is more freely available than it was when I started 20 years ago. There was barely an internet. Today, most articles, CNN, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, you get to the bottom of the article and the reporter's email is sort of right there. So, that's pretty, or they publish what's called a masthead, which is the kind of every writer at that publication and their contact details. So they're making it relatively easy for you. Things like podcasts, videocasts, and others, they tend to have sort of get in touch buttons because they're actually, like a lot of these freelance, the same with Substack newsletters, anyone who's kind of going it alone or a small staff, they're looking for sponsorship as much as anything else. So they do make it relatively easy to get in touch with you. For things like bookers, producers, TV shows, that's a little harder, partly because it's opaque. You kind of know who the on-air talent is for Squawk Box on CNBC, but you don't necessarily know kind of who the people are who decide who goes on that TV show. And that's where things, if you want to get really serious about it, that's where things like media databases, when I've named some, these are our competitors. You can use Qwoted, by the way, to look up reporter contact details too. But the better known ones are things like Cision, Muckrack, Meltwater. Heads up, they do cost money. So, something to think about there. You can also use free email lookup tools. And then the last thing that I would add here is there are a few what we would call media request platforms. Qwoted, I just showed you, was one. Qwoted reporters come in every day and they ask these questions, and these platforms match your expertise against the reporter questions. I would argue Qwoted is the best of the bunch, but I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't point you at other places where reporters are going every day to ask questions. Harrow is probably the granddaddy of them all. There's Profnet, Response Source. There's also the hashtag journo requests on Twitter. If you look up the hashtag journo requests on Twitter, you will see now, if you type that into your Twitter, you will see, every day, dozens of reporters are out there. Reporters and writers and bookers and others use that sometimes. So that sort of easy, free pickup, right? Not all of them. The challenge a lot of them have is it's hard to get signal from noise. There's just no way to separate the stuff you're interested in from the fire hose. Obviously, at Qwoted, that's the problem that we're trying to solve. But these are some things that you can do to help you find influencers. And then, what I would talk about in terms of like, okay, we know what we want to say. We know where we want to go. We found the influencers. What do we do? How do we outreach? I would say it's sales. That's why I've said thick skin required. I don't want you to be salesy, but I do think that you have to have a bit of a sales mentality. It's a numbers game. Be prepared. Rejection is a sort of the norm, not the exception. A lot of being ignored, lots of people hanging up on you in the middle of phone calls, all that sort of stuff. And some people, I think, have a very high tolerance for that, and others don't. I think a lot of people have a high tolerance for sort of just pushing out there. And some people, I understand, on this call might find the prospect of doing this, absolutely terrifying. But it's called earned media for a reason. You're earning it with your outreach. You're earning it with your persistence. You're earning it with your insights. So, email first, reach out, just say, love to get a coffee or a call. Don't reach out on Monday mornings. Everyone is busy, but otherwise mornings are a really good time. Mention their work. Remember the first point we said, we've already read their articles. Hey, Nick Bilton, I loved your last piece on X, right? The number one complaint that bookers, producers, podcasters, event organizers, and writers and reporters have of cold outreach, and they get lots of it. The number one complaint is they don't understand what I do. The people that are reaching out to me don't get what I'm writing about or what I'm putting an event on about. So mentioning the fact that you read the last piece they wrote, you know what I mean? It is a good way of showing off the bat that you care. It's just box checking. I know you, I understand what you're interested in, I read what you've written. And by the way, I find it interesting. And PS, we're all human. So, flattery kind of helps. Like, I loved that last piece you wrote. Even if you didn't, it's still a really nice thing to say. So it's applied empathy. Very briefly demonstrate your expertise. I have 15 years experience. I'm the #1 event organizer for Meetup around cloud computing or mRNA vaccines. I know that you write about mRNA vaccines. I have some interesting points. I think, the adenovirus route is underappreciated. I'd love to get a coffee in the diary if we're very close to each other. I'd love to get a call for just 10 minutes just to make an introduction. That's all you're trying to do. Just build a relationship. Because remember, we want to warm them up for any future news that we might have. And we want them to think about us when they're looking for commentary. And I think that's the other thing to say. It's a relationship. And so we're going to listen. We're going to build it over time. And we're not expecting immediate results. No one goes into earned media, free media, PR, whatever you want to call it, expecting to be on TV tomorrow. And then one of the other things, of course, that you can do is every day, hundreds of reporters come into our expert database. Again, it's free for approved members. They come in, they put themselves the reporters come in, they search topics for our expert database. So one of the things that you could do from this call to make it especially easy for yourself is add yourself as an expert. If you think you have the expertise on something, add yourself to our expert database. Use the pre-approval code that's in the comments and the link. And that way have reporters come to you. It's a nice added sort of bonus. And I say reporters, event organizers, podcasters, the media, have them come to you in addition or to augment the proactive outreach that you're going to have to do. I'm not going to lie, a fair amount of. But we're in the home stretch. We're at the end. You've thought about what the audiences are, where they're going. You've identified the influencers. You've written your stories. You've done great outreach. You've built relationships. You've been quoted. Now you've got media coverage. Well, what do we do with it? Or TV coverage, a podcast, a radio snippet. What do we do? Well, the thing that I would say about media fragmentation, the good news, as I've talked about, is it means you're more likely to find a venue that would be interested in talking to you. When I started and there were 5 newspapers in the world and 3 big TV channels, it was very, very hard to get in. But when you did get in, everybody saw it. Today, you've got the same number of people, 1 billion more people probably, but statistically the same number of people on planet Earth and 1 million more venues for their eyeballs to be spread across. So it makes it easier for you to get in. But once you're in, the phone isn't going to ring off the hook the way that it would have done 20 years ago if you'd have been in the New York Times or on TV or something. Today, the eyeballs are just, everyone is busy. It's the attention economy. Everyone is distracted. So in PR today, a friend of mine, Dawn Miller, runs a publicity shop in the West Coast in LA. And she always says, get the ink and work the link. And what she means by that is, you get the media coverage, and then it's really what you do with that coverage that counts today. It's not really, so really ultimately you speak on a panel, or you do something like this, or you speak to a local newspaper and you get in there and you sit back and you wait for everybody to call you and no one calls you. That's kind of the reality today. It's really what you do with those assets now. That's your next job, is to amplify. And I think, I'm sure that if the average age of the people on this call skew very young, very digitally native, that act of amplification probably comes very naturally to you. So maybe I'm preaching to the converted, but I'm saying it because actually a number of users that we have inside Qwoted, they get media coverage and their question to us is, what do I do now? And it can be as simple as saying, post it to your LinkedIn, post it to your clients, send it directly to your clients, post it to your Instagram, post it to your Facebook, put it on your website if you've got one. A couple of things, if you get sort of like TV coverage or video coverage, I use a platform called Ice Cream for screen recording. Sometimes a lot of the stuff we're getting now is audio. You've seen the growth of a platform like Clubhouse, but also just podcasts or radio snippets. That stuff can be hard to amplify and syndicate on your Instagram. There's a great app called Headliner, which takes your audio assets and turns them into kind of shareable, snackable, Instagram clips. But this last slide, what I'm leaving you with is, media fragmentation is good for your ability to secure it, but it is, obviously now more incumbent upon you than ever to push out the results of your coverage. It's really what you do with it next that counts. I'm going to use the next 2 minutes that I've got. I'll stop here. And I'm going to use the next 2 minutes that I've got to show you inside Qwoted just a couple of things, just a couple of the pages inside Qwoted. And I think you can probably see this. This is the source request page. If I go to advanced search and I look up, top publications that are in here every day, we see we've got Forbes and S&P and Healthline, US News and World Report, Business Insider, BBC, CIO Magazine, the New York Times, Digiday. And look at what they're asking. Everything from smartphones to Disney to, I didn't know there was a global sand shortage. I'm just finding out now. That seems unlikely. I don't know what no-load mutual funds are, but maybe you do. So if you take anything away from this page right now, other than it's free to sign up for Qwoted, so you should do it, it's look at all these reporters asking every day for insight and help. So if you're sitting there thinking, oh, I couldn't possibly be of help, they don't want to talk to me. I'm hopeful, by the way, if you've joined this webinar, then that you're thinking, I do have something to share. Look at the help that they need. Look at what they're asking for, right here. And then the last screen I'll show you is what reporters see from our side, which is the expert database, the thing that I've told you can use the pre-approval code to add yourself to. This is the expert database. Reporters come in here and they say, I'm looking for Bitcoin experts, and up it comes. What are the two most popular filters that they use once they've done this? The first is quick to respond. So reporters, and we have the data to show that this is the number one thing that reporters do. They want to know people who can get back to them quickly. So what's the takeaway? If a reporter reaches out to you, or you've managed to establish a relationship and then they message you, what's the best thing you can do is get back to them quickly. Again, go back to that first point I made, more deadlines, less time, fewer resources. If you want to be in the earned media game, part of the value you're bringing is the ability to help them at very short notice. The second most popular filter that we have on the platform, gender filter for experts, either non-white or diverse experts, or specifically female experts. I want to speak to a woman of color about venture capital, for example, or yoga. I don't just want to talk to an old white guy. That goes back to my point about the drive for diversity amongst sources. So I'll leave it there. I won't use any more of the time for a demo. Happy to answer questions about Qwoted or about any of the stuff that I've talked about inside the presentation today. I hope it was useful. I'm really looking forward to your questions. 3:40 on the dot. Janine.
No, you did. Actually, it was supposed to be 3:45, so you finished a little early. Thank you for that.
I always thought I was on for 3:40.
No. You did great. One quick thing that I did want to clarify for everyone, actually two quick things. So you can access a recording and a recap of this event on our blog, except it's not up yet and it will not be up for the next few days. So I would say if you go back next Tuesday, it will definitely be on our blog, and the link is meetup.com/blog. You can definitely find a recording and a recap of this. The other thing is, Dan, do we have some folks that are signing up to Vested, good Lord, to Qwoted? Sorry, I know you guys Vested, man. We have some folks that are signing up to Qwoted, and they're coming across some technical difficulties because they don't have a business domain. If you have to sign in with your business domain. If you don't have one, I will ask you to please privately message me in the Q&A with your first and last name and your email address, and we'll be sure to get you added. Again, if you don't have a business domain, Matt told me to say this, Dan, so it's okay. I just spoke to Matt. If you don't have a business domain, it's okay. Just please privately message me in the Q&A with your first and last name and your email address, and we will get you situated. Okay. So we have a lot of questions, Dan.
We do?
Yeah, we have a ton of questions. Okay. And I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Shiv asked, how does a small business owner operating from home get the right media exposures? It feels like an unsurmountable task. I have a podcast, blog, social media, website, etc., but still not getting eyeballs. Wow, Shiv is busy.
Yeah. And I think, you're touching there, thanks for the question. And you're touching on there, you're talking about your owned media channels. We think about paid, owned, earned, and shared. That's what we would call, it's called in modern communications is called the peso model: paid, earned, shared, owned. And basically it's a fancy way of saying advertising, paid, earned, PR, everything we've talked about here, shared, social, that would be your LinkedIn, and then owned, that might be something like your podcast. You're touching on exactly the point that I made last, which is the fragmentation of media is making it kind of hard to accumulate sufficient eyeballs on any one venue. So it's making it easier for people to get in other people's stuff, but it's making it not necessarily, it's making it not easy to necessarily attract the eyeballs because they're being split or fragmented across a million different venues. I mean, so, I don't know enough about the situation. One thing obviously is guests, and getting guests onto your podcast, getting them to share with their network. So if it's sort of you in a box alone, talking to yourself versus you and then 10 guests, so that each one of them brings a little bit of their audience. But then also you may want to think about going on other people's stuff too. It sounds like you've had some struggle with owned media channels and attracting audience to your owned media channel. And that's where an earned media strategy, making sure you go to places where there is already an audience, could be beneficial.
Thank you for that very detailed answer. All right, Dan, ready for the next one?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. Jim asked, you say follow up, but don't pester. I think this is a great question. What's a good follow-up timeline?
Yeah.
And how many times should you follow up before you stop, right? Like before you.
I mean, I don't think ever stop, but I think, there's, well, for a start, I would say a couple of days. You message on a Tuesday morning and don't hear anything by Thursday, I would follow up. Do you follow up on the follow-up? No, because at that point, you are, that to me is pestering. Do you stop? No, you change the approach. Maybe there's a news piece. Maybe you see something else that they wrote. What I'm saying is don't follow up on the same subject line more than once, right? And you can automate this. You can use, if you really want to get clever about it, you can use platforms like Yesware and Yam and actually start to build some sort of binomial tree of kind of, if no response, then send this message. If you want to get really kind of clever about it, you can start approaching earned media a bit like you might, go about email marketing. You have to be a bit careful because, as I said, I want you to really think about the influencers very carefully, and it's not spraying and praying. You've got to kind of reference what you've said, they've written about, but you could set an automated follow-up if you don't get a response within 2 days. What I'm saying is don't set that automated follow-up to go back every 3 days, because eventually all you'll get is take me off your list, because they'll mark you as a nuisance. Yes, they'll notice you, but for all the wrong reasons. So pause and think about some other way to go back to them. The next time they write a piece, saw your piece, follow them on Twitter, like their stuff on Twitter, share their stuff on Twitter. I have been talking mostly around email here, but it's not a bad idea to build a Twitter list, a Twitter follow list of all of the venues that we mentioned at the top. So there's other ways to connect. Try and connect with them on LinkedIn.
I really, really like those suggestions because, right, if you're not getting a response via email, finding another medium where you could reach out and try and connect. So thank you for that. Can I ask you for a favor? Can you stop sharing your screen so that we can get a better view of you? There you are. Hi. Okay. Sonar asked, what is a reasonable investment into PR resources to see positive results, like brand awareness?
Well, firstly, I would say, as I think I've really touched on with my presentation, the first investment of resources, time and energy and thought. And I think if you don't have that to allocate, don't do it. Because even money won't substitute for time, energy, and thought. If you've got even I'm going to spend $5,000 a month on a PR representative or a PR agency, but you don't have any thoughts to be a thought leader with, or you don't have time to write. I've got a PR person. We've got a PR person. He's emailed me 3 times about a question that's going on in the media that relates to, my book. And could I speak on it? Yes, I could. Do I have the time to write the thoughts down? No, I don't. So I'm just wasting my money and his time. P.S. Tonight, I do have a plan to sit down and write my thoughts out. But it goes back to this is not just something you can just solve with money, because it's earned media. If you've got money you want to spend and you want eyeballs, buy them. Owned media, paid media. Think about, maybe it's some LinkedIn ad or some Facebook ad or some Instagram promotion of some posts, depending on what kind of a business you're in. But if you want earned media, the resources begin actually not monetarily, but with your brain and your thought and your time to read and your time to consume the market. We built Qwoted in part because we think that if you've got good expertise to share, that should be free for you to do so, that you shouldn't have to, that no one should have to pay a PR agency in order to have their ideas exposed to the media and to influencers. If you do want to do that a lot inside Qwoted, you hit a cap of the amount of stuff you can do, and you pay us $150. So we think $150 a month is like a pro amount of money, which obviously compared to the world I came out of with retainers from PR agencies of tens of thousands of dollars, we think $150 a month is a pretty big drop. And we think that's the right kind of way to think about it. It should be free. If you want to do a lot of it, it should be max a couple of $100.
Thank you, Dan. I just did a quick view of the Q&A again, and I just want to do this PSA again. For those that would like to get access to Qwoted, if you don't have a business domain, please private message me in the Q&A feature with your first and last name and email address, and we will get you situated or sorted. What's the right word? What's like proper English, situated or sorted?
You mean British English is sorted?
Yeah. Sorted. Okay, I love it. Okay.
But like proper English is situated.
Okay. Well, I like British English better. Okay. All right. The next one is, I was just told you can't private message. Okay. All right. We will figure out another solution. Sorry about that. All right. So my next question for you, Dan, is, sorry, I just lost the question. Michelle asked, can I use Qwoted to quote sources for a client's book? I'm a book and publishing consultant.
Yes, you can. That's a great, look, essentially your media in our mind, because you've got an audience and you want to allocate that audience towards some people. So yes, you can put out what we would call a source request. You can sign up as a media person and put out a source request and say what it is. And that could be a podcast. I'm looking for a guest for my podcast. I'm looking for someone to quote in an article. I'm writing an article and I'd like to talk to someone about it. Or indeed, I'm looking for, my client is writing a book, which is being published by HarperCollins. And I'm looking for fintech entrepreneurs to talk to for that book. Yeah, that's all media activity in our mind. Go crazy.
Thank you. Okay, so one more thing. We just turned on the chat again. So if you'd like to send me your first and last name and your email address, just privately, you can privately message me on the chat. And again, wait, the proper way is sorted, right? We will get you sorted.
Get you sorted.
That's the British way.
Yeah, I mean, there's British people on this call who are probably like, what the? I've lived here for 20 plus years. I don't remember what British English is. Sorted.
All right, next question. Anonymous asked, is it a bad idea to put myself out on any platform as a source if I'm not authorized to speak on the record and can only refer them to someone in the organization who is?
Good question. So yes, I was assuming, perhaps erroneously, that everybody listening to this, was probably, more freelance or more self-representing or whatever. But it is a good question. Perhaps you work for IBM and perhaps you are, someone at IBM, you think you've got some ideas. Do you want to come on here with your IBM address and put yourself in as an expert? You probably won't get in trouble, but I think it is, a lot of big organizations have approved spokespeople policies. So if you work at somewhere where if you were to show up in the New York Times tomorrow as so-and-so from IBM, that's good. By the way, a couple of things. Firstly, IBM or the organization, Coca-Cola, wherever it is that you work for, will have a very sophisticated media tracking system that picks up on the fact that then, anytime it says so-and-so from Coca-Cola said the following thing about the beverage industry, we always say in our industry, we want PR to be a career enhancing opportunity, not a career ending one. And so, yeah, you might want to, before you put yourself in here as the spokesperson for a company, go and check with your corporate communications department that you are, it sounds like you want to, that's great. I would say go talk to them and hopefully get media trained by them and get pushed forward as an organization. As I said, just like the media, organizations are also under pressure to diversify the experts that they put forward, the people they put forward. And I'm not just talking about people of color, women, I'm talking about younger people. It's not just the CFO and the CEO and the COO anymore. Sometimes they want to hear from the young engineer and they love, and if you've got a passion for it, go and communicate that to your communications team.
Thank you, Dan. All right, we have two more questions. Daniel, another Dan. Daniel asked, what are your thoughts on press releases and services like PR Newswire?
Yeah, I mean, I think they serve a purpose. I'm not a big fan. It depends on who you are. If you are a large publicly traded company, services like PR Newswire, Business Wire is the other one, the big two. They perform certain things. For a start, let's say it costs you $1,500, $1,000 to $1,500 to put out a release on those platforms. If you are IBM, as I mentioned, or Coca-Cola, you can afford to do that all day long. They have things like Edgar filing, which is they have fiduciary responsibilities as publicly traded companies to be thoughtful about the information that they share. And one thing that these newswire companies do very well is they distribute the news equally at the same time to everybody. And so you avoid, for big publicly traded companies, any accusations from the SEC and other organizations that you're somehow selectively releasing information to people. So it's quite good for that purpose. If you are a small company, if you were like a yoga instructor and you're trying to raise your profile in a local region, I couldn't think of probably a worse way for you to burn $1,500 than to put out a press release over a Business Wire and Newswire. There are cheaper Newswire services out there that do much of the same thing. That is to say, you get the kind of the automated bot pickup, but also buy an Instagram, promote your posts on Instagram with some boosting. Use the money for that, not for a press release distribution service. So kind of it's horses for courses. It depends on the size of the organization. But if you're like a one-person thing, I wouldn't recommend it.
Thank you, Dan. You said you can't think of a worse way to spend $1,500. I sure can. Shoes and more shoes. Okay.
That is fair.
The last question. Jack asked, I have been doubling my followers authentically on Twitter by participating on Twitter Spaces. What is your opinion on the PR usage of Clubhouse?
I think it's really early to talk about. I mean, basically, I don't know enough. Basically, I've been on Clubhouse. I think I'm just really getting old. And so for me, Clubhouse is just a bit well, both literally and figuratively noisy. I think it's a little too early to see how some of these things will shake out. I think this actually is really interesting. It goes back to that first question, which was about, I've got a podcast, I've got LinkedIn, no one looks at it. And I think, the problem with the multiplication of venues is sort of everyone is being encouraged to create channels, but no one is thinking about audiences, which goes back to the very first thing that I talked about in my presentation. It's kind of like, if a tree falls in a forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? I think if, yes, you can create a podcast. Yes, you can create a YouTube channel. Yes, you can create a clubhouse. But if you can't attract the audience, what's the point? You're spending a lot of time. Channels are easy to create. They're very hard to populate, and they're even harder to get audiences for. So, depends. If someone's inviting you to join their clubhouse discussion, by all means, go for it. If you're like, should I be adding clubhouse, like whoever that first person was, like I'm having trouble I've got this podcast I do, I'm having trouble getting people to the podcast. I've got my LinkedIn, I've got my website, nothing seems to be working. I don't think adding clubhouse to that mix is going to help you. Actually, quite the opposite. As I said in my advice, maybe start looking at places where there are embedded audiences and show up. And try and get there. That's essentially what earned media is instead of owned media. It's not build your own thing. It's find other people's venues where they've already built an audience and argue the point that you deserve to be in front of their audience on your merits.
Thank you for that, Jan. Okay, thank you so much for participating in today's event. I definitely learned a lot. I always love hearing you talk. Like, you know what you're talking about. I learned so much, and it looks like the audience learned a ton as well. Before we go, I would like to share 2 slides. I'm going to do some shameless plugging now, Dan.
Good.
Okay, first shameless plug. If you would like to find others who share your interest, Meetup has a promotion going on where you can start a group and save 50% on your first subscription. All you have to do is go to meetupsavings.com. Next slide, please. And our second one, I don't know if y'all have heard me say this before when you've joined me in previous events, but Meetup launched its first ever podcast at the beginning of the year with our CEO. Keep connected. I'd like to invite you all to pull out your phones if you don't already have your phone out. And scan this QR code so that you can subscribe to our podcast. If you do not have your phone, you can simply subscribe by just going on meetuppodcast.com. We launched an episode yesterday with the New York Tech organizer, Andy Saldana, and it's about diversity, inclusion, and community. And we'll be launching another episode in 2 weeks where we'll be sharing some very important dating tips. So again, pull out your phone, scan the QR code. If you don't have access to your phone, don't worry. You just go on meetuppodcast.com and you can subscribe to our podcast. Again, Dan, thank you so much for joining us today. This was such a great event, very informative. You shared very clear and very tactical information. And thanks for sharing the code with everyone so they can sign up. Thank you all that joined us today. I hope you had as much fun as I did. Have a great day and see you next time. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.